The instant Lyra's fingers closed around the soft fur, she knew she'd done it again, moved too fast, revealed too much. And now the human conservationist, standing 3 meters away, was staring at her with eyes wide as moons. The Kavari cub hadn't even whimpered yet, still suspended in that precious half-second between slipping and understanding it was falling. And there Lyra stood with the squirming bundle of silver fluff cradled against her chest, her heart hammering not from exertion, but from the weight of being seen. "How did you, Doctor Marcus?" Chen's voice trailed off, his datapad forgotten in his hand. And Lyra felt the familiar cold weight settle in her stomach, because this was always how it started, the wonder. Then the questions. Then the careful distance people kept from things they couldn't quite understand. She'd been so careful for 6 months aboard the Frontier Research Station, moving at normal speed, thinking at normal speed, pretending her neural processors didn't map probability cascades 1,000 times per second. But apparently watching a 10-week-old alien cub tumble off an examination table was enough to shatter her carefully constructed facade. The cub chirped softly, tiny claws kneading her uniform jacket, completely oblivious to the fact that it had just exposed the secret Lyra had been guarding since she'd arrived as part of the Centauri exchange program. "I was paying attention," she said carefully, knowing how weak it sounded, how impossible. Because she'd been standing at the supply cabinet with her back turned when the cub's weight had shifted on the metal table, when the probability cascade had bloomed in her mind like a geometric flower. 47 chance of fall in 0.3 seconds, 89% in 0.6 seconds, 99.8% in 0.9 seconds, and her body had moved before thought, before choice, before the human brain watching her could even process what was happening. Marcus took a step closer, and Lyra resisted the urge to step back, to flee, to request immediate transfer back to Centauri Station, where everyone moved like she did, where she wasn't a freak of nature, but just another veiled one, just another member of a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world where slow meant dead and hesitation meant extinction. "Lyra," he said, and something in his tone made her actually look at him, really look, past her own panic, to see, not fear in his expression, but something else. Something that looked almost like relief. That was incredible. She blinked, recalibrating, because that wasn't the script. Wasn't how this conversation usually went in her experience, limited though it was with humans discovering what she could do. "I need to get the cub back to its enclosure," she said, instead of responding, moving toward the habitat modules at what she desperately hoped was a normal pace. But Marcus followed, his longer strides, keeping pace easily. "You've been holding back," he said, not a question. And Lyra felt something twist in her chest. Because, of course, she'd been holding back. That was the whole point. The veiled ones didn't send their fastest, didn't send their best. They sent people like her who could almost pass, who could almost blend. Because humanity wasn't ready for the full truth of what her species could do. The cub squirmed again, and Lyra carefully placed it in the warming nest, where its siblings were already curled together. A pile of silver and gray fluff that represented the last hope for the Kavari species after the solar flares had ravaged their homeworld. "These cubs are why we're here," she said quietly, not looking at Marcus, focusing on the tiny lives before her. 6 months of joint conservation work between our species, and we've managed to save 43 breeding pairs. "Don't change the subject," Marcus said, but his voice was gentle, curious, rather than demanding. And Lyra found herself turning to face him, despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain distance, to rebuild her walls. "What was I supposed to do?" she asked, and was mortified to hear her voice crack slightly. "Let it fall? Let it panic and possibly injure itself just to maintain cover?" "Cover from what?" Marcus asked, and he had moved closer somehow, was standing near enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Could smell the coffee he'd been drinking earlier mixed with the antiseptic scent of the lab. "From people thinking you're dangerous? Lyra, you just saved that cub with reflexes that would make a combat pilot jealous. That's not something to hide." But he didn't understand, couldn't understand, because he hadn't grown up different even among his own kind, hadn't been the slowest of the veiled ones, the one whose neural processing lagged microseconds behind her peers, who'd been deemed suitable for diplomatic work precisely because her limitations made her less intimidating to other species. "My people don't send ambassadors who can catch falling objects," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. They send people like me slow enough to seem safe. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Lyra watched emotions flicker across his face with the same probability mapping instinct that had betrayed her earlier: confusion at 2.3 seconds, understanding at 4.7 seconds, something softer at 6.2 seconds that she couldn't quite name. Slow, he finally said, and laughed, a short bark of sound that held no mockery. Lyra, you crossed 3 meters and caught a falling cub before I could even turn around. If you're slow, what does that make the rest of your people? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications, and Lyra felt the careful edifice of half-truths and diplomatic evasions begin to crumble. Fast enough that it scares people, she admitted. Fast enough that when the Veiled Ones first made contact with the galactic community, 3 species classified us as an extinction-level threat until we proved we meant no harm. She watched his face carefully, waiting for the fear to bloom, for the moment when wonder would curdle into wariness. But Marcus just nodded slowly, processing. So they send you, he said. Someone who seems more human speed. Someone who won't terrify our allies. Yes, Lyra confirmed, and was surprised by how much it hurt to say it out loud. To admit that her greatest qualification for this position was being the least of her kind. The cub chirped again from its nest, and both of them glanced over automatically, checking on the fragile lives they'd been entrusted to preserve. I think that's the saddest thing I've heard all week, Marcus said quietly, and when Lyra looked at him in confusion, he continued. That you think being able to save a life is something you need to apologize for. The words hit her harder than she'd expected, and she had to look away, blinking against the sudden burning in her eyes. You don't understand what it's like, she said. Being too much of one thing and not enough of another. Too fast for humans. Too slow for my own people. Always caught in between. Actually, Marcus said. And there was something careful in his voice now, like he was approaching a skittish animal. I might understand more than you think. He held up his left hand. And Lyra noticed for the first time the subtle shimmer under the skin, the telltale signature of neural implants. Experimental augmentation, he explained. I was in a shuttle accident 5 years ago. Broke my back. Damaged my spinal cord. The doctors gave me two choices: wheelchair for life, or try an experimental neural bridge that would let me walk but would also speed up my reaction time. My processing speed. Make me different. Lyra stared at the faint lines of light beneath his skin, tracing the pathway of technology that had rebuilt him, and felt something shift in her chest. The other researchers, Marcus continued, they got weird about it. Started treating me like I wasn't quite human anymore. Like the implants made me less, or dangerous, or just other. That's why I requested transfer to the frontier station. Figured out here, on the edge of known space, maybe people would care more about competence than conformity. Does it hurt? Lyra asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it, and Marcus smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. Sometimes, he admitted, when I push too hard, or when the weather changes, the implants are still partly organic. They respond to atmospheric pressure. But mostly it just feels like being alone in a crowd, you know? Like everyone else is moving through water, and you're moving through air. And no matter how much you slow down, you can never quite sync up. And Lyra did know, knew it so deeply that it ached. And before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and took his hand, feeling the slight warmth of the implants through his skin. I'm sorry, she said, for assuming I was the only one who felt like this. Marcus's fingers curled around hers, gentle but certain, and Lyra was struck by the realization that she wasn't calculating probability cascades, wasn't mapping trajectories or predicting outcomes. She was just present in this moment, holding hands with someone who understood. The cub didn't panic, Marcus said after a moment, and Lyra looked at him in confusion until he continued. When you caught it, it didn't have time to be scared, because you were there before the fear could even register. That's not a weakness, Lyra. That's a gift. She thought about that. About the tiny life she'd saved without thinking. About all the times she'd held herself back out of fear that being her full self would drive people away. And wondered what it would be like to stop apologizing for her existence. I can see you thinking, Marcus said, with a small smile. Your eyes do this thing where the light shifts, gets brighter somehow. It's beautiful. Lyra felt her cheeks warm, bioluminescent cells in her skin responding to the emotion, making her glow faintly silver blue. That's the one thing I can't hide, she admitted. When I feel something strongly, I light up. It's mortifying. It's honest, Marcus countered. In a universe full of people hiding what they really are, that kind of honesty is rare. A chime sounded from the CUB panel, and Lyra reluctantly released his hand to check the message. Supply shuttle is arriving early, she read. They're requesting assistance with the unloading. Apparently there's some delicate equipment that needs careful handling. Marcus glanced at her, eyebrow raised. Delicate equipment that needs someone with exceptional reflexes and spatial awareness. It appears so, Lyra said, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, not anxiety about being discovered, but anticipation at being useful. Want some help? Marcus asked. I may not be veiled one fast, but my implants give me pretty good coordination. I'd like that, Lyra said, and meant it more than she could easily express. They walked together toward the docking bay, and Lyra found herself matching his pace naturally, not forcing herself slower, but finding a rhythm that worked for both of them. Can I ask you something? Marcus said, as they navigated the curved corridors of the station. Why did you really come here? To the Frontier Station? It's not exactly a prestigious posting. Lyra considered the question, considered all the diplomatic answers she'd prepared, and decided that maybe, just maybe, honesty was worth the risk. Because I was tired of being afraid, she said. Afraid of being too much, or not enough, or just wrong, somehow. I thought if I came out here, far enough from both Earth and Centauri Prime, I could figure out who I actually am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else needs. And have you? Marcus asked. Figured it out? I'm starting to, Lyra said, and felt her skin glow a little brighter. Today helped. The docking bay was a cathedral of metal and light, the supply shuttle already nestled in its berth like an egg in a nest. The pilot, a grizzled woman named Captain Rodriguez, waved them over with visible relief. Thank the stars, she said. I've got 3 crates of crystalline growth mattresses that are apparently so fragile they'll shatter if you look at them wrong, and my usual loading crew is down with that Rigelian flu that's going around. Please tell me one of you has steady hands. We can handle it, Lyra said, and didn't miss the look Marcus shot her, the small smile that said he understood what she was really saying, that she was done hiding. The mattresses were indeed delicate, nested in gravitic suspension fields that required precise manipulation to transfer without disrupting the crystalline lattices. Lyra found herself falling into a rhythm, her hands moving with the speed and precision her people were known for. And instead of anxiety, she felt free. Holy hell, Captain Rodriguez breathed, watching Lyra transfer the 3rd matrix in the time it would have taken most people to approach the 1st. I've heard stories about the veiled ones, but seeing it in person is something else. Lyra tensed, waiting for the fear, but the captain just grinned. You wouldn't be interested in a side job on cargo runs, would you? I could cut my loading time in half. She's a little busy saving endangered species, Marcus said, and there was pride in his voice that made Lyra's glow intensify. But I'll keep the offer in mind, Lyra said, surprising herself. It's nice to be appreciated for what I can do, rather than in spite of it. They finished the unloading in comfortable silence, working in sync, and Lyra realized that Marcus had been right. His augmented reflexes let him anticipate her movements, match her rhythm in a way that felt natural rather than forced. When the last crate was secured, Captain Rodriguez clapped them both on the shoulder. You two make a good team, she said. Don't see that kind of synchronization often. After the captain left, Lyra and Marcus stood in the empty docking bay, the hum of the station's systems a gentle backdrop. She's right, Marcus said quietly. We do work well together. Because you're not afraid of me, Lyra said, and realized as she spoke that it was the truth. She'd been circling around all day. Because you see what I can do, and don't flinch away. Should I? Marcus asked, stepping closer. Flinch away? Most people do, Lyra admitted. Even my own people sometimes. The other veiled ones see me as defective, too slow to be truly one of them. And everyone else sees me as too fast to other, too alien to really connect with. Then they're idiots, Marcus said bluntly. And the certainty in his voice made something tight in Lyra's chest finally loosen. Lyra, in the past 6 months working with you, I've watched you save a dozen species from extinction, mediate conflicts between research teams who could barely stand each other, and work 18-hour days without complaint. You're brilliant, you're kind, and yes, you're fast, but that's just one part of who you are. You really believe that? Lyra asked, her voice small. I really do, Marcus said, and took her hand again, his augmented nervous system making his skin warm against hers. And I think maybe we both ended up at this station for the same reason, because out here, on the frontier, we get to decide who we are, instead of letting fear make that choice for us. Lyra looked at their joined hands, at the faint glow of her skin and the subtle shimmer of his implants. Two people rebuilt by circumstance into something different than what they'd started as, and felt something crystallize inside her, not fear, but determination. I don't want to hide anymore, she said. I don't want to pretend to be slower, dimmer, less than I am, just to make other people comfortable. Then don't, Marcus said simply. Be exactly who you are, Lyra. Let yourself shine. And maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, or the warmth of his hand in hers, or the memory of the cub she'd saved without thinking. But Lyra felt the last of her careful walls crumble. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. Thank you for letting me, Marcus replied. And Lyra realized that this moment of connection, of being fully seen and fully accepted, was worth every second of fear she'd carried to get here. A soft chirping sound made them both turn, and Lyra laughed to see the Kavari cub from earlier, having somehow escaped its enclosure, padding toward them on oversized paws. How did you get out? She asked, scooping it up. You're supposed to be napping with your siblings, the cub just purred, tiny claws, kneading her jacket again, and Marcus reached over to scratch behind its tufted ears. I think it likes you, he said. I think it trusts me, Lyra corrected. Because when it was falling, I was there to catch it, and that, Marcus said softly, is what makes you extraordinary. Not the speed, not the reflexes, though those are impressive, but the fact that you choose to use them to help, to protect, to save lives that might otherwise be lost. Lyra looked at him. This human who'd been rebuilt with technology and determination, who'd chosen to see her gifts instead of her differences, and felt something slot into place in her chest. A sense of rightness she hadn't known she was missing. Stay with me? She asked impulsively. After the shift ends, we could take the cubs to the observation deck, let them see the stars. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and more hopeful. I would love that, he said, but only if you promise to stop holding back. I want to see you, Lyra, all of you, not the version you think I can handle. Deal, Lyra said, and felt her skin glow bright enough to cast shadows. But fair warning, when I stop holding back, I'm a lot. Good, Marcus said, and squeezed her hand gently. Because so am I. They walked back toward the conservation wing together, the cub dozing in Lyra's arms, and for the first time since arriving at the frontier station, Lyra felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not despite her differences, but because of them. With someone who understood that being extraordinary wasn't something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. The cub chirped one more time, a soft sound of contentment, and Lyra thought about that moment of falling, of instinct taking over, of choosing to act rather than hide, and realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen, scars and speed and shining skin and all, by someone willing to look past the surface to the person underneath. What are you thinking? Marcus asked, and Lyra turned to him with a smile. That I'm glad the cub fell, she said, because if it hadn't, I might have kept hiding forever. Then I'm grateful for clumsy cubs and second chances, Marcus said, and Lyra laughed, the sound bright and unguarded in the corridor. Above them, through the transparent sections of the station's hull, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of connection and courage playing out in the metal corridors below. And Lyra thought that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a sense of humor. After all that, it would take something as simple as a falling cub to teach her that the thing she'd been hiding wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. And that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't made in laboratories or distant worlds, but in the moment when one person looks at another and says, without fear or reservation, I see you, and you are enough.